of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, make yourself at home comfortable. It is great to be back with you. I've been up in Pennsylvania for the past month with my family, and yet it's good to be back and to get back into the swing of things here at St. Mary's, and to enter into the lessons for today, and especially the gospel lesson, which was, I have to say, was a real an encouragement to me as I was dealing with all of the challenges of a possible hurricane and the coronavirus and all of the things that continue to challenge us, being really fed by this gospel lesson, and it's been important. This gospel lesson has in the history of the church as an encouragement to the church in times of adversity. So we see it. It's a well-known passage. So immediately before this passage, you heard the lesson from the gospel last week, which was Jesus' feeding of the 5,000, and this tremendous miracle that happens. And so now at the end, Jesus rushes his disciples to get into the boat to go and to eventually meet him on the other side of the lake. And he sends home the crowds and then goes off by himself to be able to pray. So he prays throughout the night, and maybe he slept part of it. He's just kind of rested himself, but certainly in his relationship with the Father was restored. And yet the disciples didn't have that kind of a calm night. They were out there in the midst of the lake, and the winds, kicked up, and it was a tremendous storm, and so they're having a hard time making progress. And remember, again, it's dark, and you can't see, and probably cloudy, and these experienced fishermen probably would not normally have let themselves get caught in the middle of the night out on a sea like this, except for Jesus sent them out there. And so then we got to ask the question, so what was Jesus thinking? Did he not know what the circumstances were going to be, that the weather was going to be so tumultuous and challenging? Was his Doppler radar not working that night? Well, I think our theology would say Jesus probably did know that a storm was coming, and he yet chose to go ahead and send the disciples out anyway. Jesus, as we're his followers, as we're his disciples, he doesn't use the circumstances around us just to somehow isolate us or insulate us from the challenges that are around us. He could have said to the disciples, the weather's going to get bad. Why don't you just walk around, or why don't you just stay here someplace, and then I'll meet you in the morning after having spent a night in prayer. He didn't say that. He sent them out into the midst of the storm. And so it is like this Jesus of ours to send us out into the circumstances of the world, into the storms of life. So he doesn't just kind of keep us safe, insulated from things that are scary or potentially harmful. He sends us out in order to be able to do his work. And that's where we get formed. That's where we have our deepest experiences of who Jesus is in the midst of adversity. And so we encounter, as we're there in the dark and the storm kicks up and we hang on for dear life, it's where we discover really how weak and fallible we are, and how all of this bravado that we try to show everybody else all the time, it just kind of goes out the window when there are true threats around us. And so these disciples are there in the boat, these fishermen hanging on with white knuckles, in the midst of the storm. And then suddenly they notice that there's a shadow, a presence that's out there that's coming by them, and they let out a scream, ah! So it's one thing to be out in the middle of the lake and that it's storming and the waves are threatening to come over the side of the boat and you think you're going to drown and all of that. But then, add to it being haunted by a ghost. It's a ghost, they said. It's, how can it get much worse than that? In our lives, in the challenges that are around us, things can be terrifying for us. And even when God comes to try to help us, we can even see him as a threat, as somebody who makes our situation worse, not better. And yet the disciples hear this voice, and they hear this voice that's familiar to them, comforting to them. He says, "It is I. Don't be afraid." In the midst of the storm, in the midst of all of the circumstances, in the midst of all of the challenges and fears and all of the things that are going on around you, it's I. And that phrase, "it is I," is really a translation of the phrase, "I am." It's the same phrase that God used in the Old Testament when, he met Moses at the burning bush, and Moses asked, "Who is it that's speaking to me, and that I should tell other people who you are?" And that voice said, "I am. Tell them that I am has sent you." It's that same expression that Jesus uses in the midst of the storm. I am. Don't be afraid. I am. Don't be afraid. Oftentimes we take difficult circumstances and hard times as a sign of the absence of Jesus. And yet Jesus meets us. His presence is with us in the midst of the storm. And we have the opportunity to be able to hear his voice, to recognize that he's bigger than the storm, that he's not afraid of the storm. He's in control of the storm. And he brings his love and care and power to us in the midst of the storm. And then, so you can see these disciples, can you? Just kind of wondering about it all. So what, caught in between terror and relief. And then there's Peter. Peter, I have a good friend who says discipleship or the following of Jesus is sometimes easier if we don't see it as just simply following Jesus, because Jesus is so out of our league. He sets the bar so high. So sometimes in trying to follow Jesus, it's easier for us to follow Peter, who's following Jesus, than just to follow Jesus, because Peter is the impetuous one. I mean, he's always sticking his foot in his mouth. He's always doing things that are a little crazy, and yet we can identify with him in all of his impatience and fallibility. He's kind of a reflection of our inner passions, and so Peter is the one in this boatload of cowards. Peter is the one who is able to look at that ghost, but recognize the voice, and to say, "Jesus, if it's you, then tell me to come out and walk on the water towards you. Tell me to come out towards you on the water, to walk on the water." You just gotta love it. I mean, so where did he get this idea? I mean, it certainly was none of the disciples who were wanting to say, "Hey, let's us get out there on the water and walk too." None of the disciples were saying that. And Jesus himself doesn't even say to Peter or any of the others. He said, "Well, hey, the water's fine. Come on out and join me." He doesn't say that. Jesus never says that. He never even makes that invitation. But it is this passion that comes up, wells out of Peter after hearing the voice of Jesus. It's just this passion that is kind of like, "Jesus, I mean, we just saw you feed 5,000. We're seeing you walk on the water. Wherever you are, I want to be there, because it's safer with you than it is not with you." It's safer to be with you out there walking on the water than it is to be with these guys in this boat. And I want to be there with you. I want to see the things that you see and do the things that you do. And so if you tell me, I'm going to come out and be with you. And so just tell me. Just tell me. Would you tell me? Tell me. Tell me to come, and I'll come. And so Jesus says one word. He says, come. Now, can you kind of get a sense, or in your mind's eye, of the look on Jesus' face as he said that? My sense is this look of appreciation, of real love for Peter, of maybe even some admiration for Peter and his courage and his kind of crazy devotion to him. And he doesn't discourage it. He doesn't say, well, Peter, why don't you just calm down and wait, and I'll get in the boat and we'll calm this storm down and everything will be okay. He doesn't do that. He just says to Peter, come. What an honoring of the faith and the passion and the love of Peter. And so Peter, at the invitation, he's the boat's rocking and the disciples are hanging on for dear life, but Peter will have none of it. And he lifts up one foot and he gets it over the side of the boat. And you remember the waves are still coming. And he reaches over and he's got his eyes on Jesus, and he pulls out his other foot, and the waves are coming up, slapping up against his thigh and splashing the spray in his face. And he's looking at Jesus, and he just walks towards him. And all he sees is Jesus and this invitation to walk towards him. And then you know the story, of course. I mean, because our minds immediately go there. So Peter, as he's walking across the water, all of a sudden he remembers. He says, oh, yeah. These waves, they're pretty big, and the wind is really whipping up, and it's like, and I'm standing out here on water. And so why not just be overcome by the ridiculousness of this situation and give in to your fears and start to sink? And so he cries out in the midst of sinking, Jesus, save me. Oh, hang on to those words. My brothers and sisters, in the midst of adversity, in the midst of giving in to fear, hang on to those words. Jesus, save me. And extending your hand towards Jesus, and Jesus grabs it. And he says, why did you fear? Oh, you of little faith. Why did you fear? You're doing so well. I don't hear a rebuke on the lips of Jesus here. I mean, this sense of love and encouragement. It's kind of like, you're doing so well. You're doing so well. Come on up. Why did you fear? You knew exactly what it was that you needed to do. It's like dealing with a toddler who's taking their first steps, and they finally they get standing, and they let go of the coffee table, and they extend their hands to their mom or their dad or maybe their grandparents, and they just start walking towards you, and then maybe they make it a step or two steps and they begin to fall, and it's like, I'm so proud of you. First steps. I'm so proud of you. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. It's okay. I'm right here for you to lift you up, to make sure that you're not going to get hurt. Our eye does go to Peter and to his giving into fear and his sinking in the water, and in our human nature we look at him and we say, well, see, that's what happens. You get all excited and you get all passionate about things, and then you put yourself out there, and then all of a sudden reality sets in, and you sink, and fortunately, Jesus pulls your bacon out of the fire, but basically you're an idiot for having believed it, right? So we need to wrestle with this. So was Peter a failure? Was Peter a failure? I don't know about you, but I don't know, other than Jesus, I don't know about anybody else in the whole history of the world that walked on water other than Peter. And how many steps do you think he took? Did he take 1 step, 2 steps, 5 steps, 10 steps? Was he like way out there, away from the boat? I don't know. But I don't know anybody else who's walked on water before. We get afraid of failure, afraid of following through on these passions and these loves of ours, because somehow we feel like we're gonna make a fool out of ourselves or be shamed. When in the eyes of Jesus, it's just, you're doing so well, and I'm here for you. And it's only through falling down, it's only through failure that we learn that we can trust in him, and we can be made stronger, and our faith made so that it will endure over time. Jonas Salk, who was the discoverer of the vaccine for polio, tried 200 times unsuccessfully to develop that vaccine. And someone asked him, so how does it feel to have overseen 200 failures? And he said, I never failed 200 times at anything in my life. I was taught not to use the word failure. I just discovered 200 ways how not to vaccinate for polio. Winston Churchill was asked the question, this tremendous courage of Winston Churchill to stand up against the audacity and ugliness of Adolf Hitler when everybody wanted to pacify him. And yet Churchill oftentimes just alone stood against him, and somebody asked him, how was it, what prepared you for the willingness to be able to stand alone against a brute like Hitler? And he said when he had to repeat a grade in elementary school. The reporter laughed and he said, really? He said, you mean you learned that lesson because you failed a year in grade school? And Churchill said, I never failed anything in my life. I was just given a second opportunity to get it right. We are so oftentimes afraid of failure. We feel the movement of the Spirit and the passion inside of us, raising us up as we see what it is that Jesus is inviting us to be a part of. And yet, when we see the size of the waves and the wind, and we see the dangers that are out there, we cower and we give in to fear, and we never know what it's like to walk on water. And yet, the people of God, that's our calling. The people of God, it is our calling to be water walkers, to be people who are so focused on the eyes of Jesus that the waves and the wind just pale in comparison. I know some people who walk on water around here, and they don't do it perfectly. And they don't do it all the time because, like for all of us, there are times we have to then cry out to Jesus and say, Jesus, save me. That is the cry of a disciple. Jesus, save me. And so Jesus saves us. But it is the passion and confidence that comes from looking in his eyes and hearing his voice and hearing him invite us to come out into what can be very threatening and difficult, complicated circumstances, and yet, you know, we've got this to be able to offer. I think of John Norris and his unpredictable soup ministry that now has distributed thousands of these little bags of soup. It's fed countless people around in our area. I think of Maureen Cotter. Maureen Cotter is your rector's warden. She serves on the vestry. She's also the chair of the re-entry committee. And, she retired from a corporate job and then had the audacity to ask Jesus what he wanted her to do. And so she came onto the vestry, and then I asked her to be the rector's warden, and then she was willing to chair the reentry committee. And this all before we knew what the coronavirus even was, and yet she's been willing to kind of walk out there in the midst of very trying circumstances and helping to chart the course for the rest of us. And I think of Haley Resitar. Haley Resitar is a member of our youth group. When she heard that, normally we have a mission trip in the summers, and so for the past couple of years, our crew has we've sent a team to Ecuador, and we've established a partnership with a community there, and so we had a mission trip that was scheduled for this summer, but because of the coronavirus, it was all canceled. But Haley was the one who said, well, but we live in this digital age, and we have relationships with these people. So can't we still do a virtual mission trip with them and include more people than we normally would include? And so that's what we're doing. So starting tomorrow for a week at 6 o'clock p.m. each day until 7:30, there is an opportunity for us to participate. Anyone who wants to, you got to register with Alexis Stuckey. To anyone who wants to participate, to go through this mission experience, to learn more about Ecuador and more about missions, and there will be a piece of it, not the beginning, but towards the end, that will have things for kids, interaction with kids to be able to do, and then next Sunday we'll culminate it with a celebration of mission here at St. Mary's. So, what an amazing thing. It's just what happens when people just focus their eyes on Jesus and hear his invitation. We get this passion that comes out of us when we hear his voice, and this desire to come and be with him, and we just say, so Jesus, just tell us to come. And we'll be out there. We're going to jump out of this boat. We're going to leave behind the things that aren't comfortable. We're going to leave behind the people who are paralyzed by fear. We're going to leave those things behind, and we're going to come and we're going to be with you. And we're going to do the things that you do, because that's what's exciting. That's what changes lives. That's where we find our joy. And so if it's walking across water, we're going to do it because we're with you. And we're not going to be afraid that we will fail, because lots of times we will fail. But we can always cry out to him, and he saves us. He grabs us by the hand, and we'll have been more and more formed as his followers. Yeah. The church, the body of Christ, is filled with water walkers. It happens every time. When we get our eyes off the difficult circumstances around us, because we see something that is so much more beautiful and so much more powerful in the eyes of Jesus. When we hear his voice, calm us, stir us up, and invite us to come towards him. And so we just don't even notice anymore the challenges that are around us. All we see is where it is that we're headed, and it's towards him. Because we want to worship him. We want to be with him. We want to do what he does. We want to see what he sees. We want to say the kinds of things that he says, because he's changed our life. We're his people. We're his people. Amen. So let us affirm our faith in him by using the form of the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is, seen and unseen. We believe in one Lord,